Good afternoon. Welcome to my presentation on regionalization and multi-level governance in the Belt and Road Initiative. So I'm glad to join this conference for my first time, and I will try to be short and precise. And at the beginning, maybe some words about myself and the topic in general. So since 2017, I'm research associate in Germany at the Catholic University of Eichstätt in Ingolstadt. And specifically, this is the chair of tourism and center for entrepreneurship. And yeah, I think since the beginning, I took part in research on the New Silk Road, how we call it New Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative. But we had also research visits in Georgia, Azerbaijan, Central Asia, and China. Some of the research results that I present to you today are also belonging to my PhD studies and some recent papers. Why I've chosen this regional focus here, we will go into detail, I think, during the next slides, but I just like to highlight the role of region building and that BRI is an initiative that needs to be shaped on various spatial scales at the end. So this is why I have focused also on some regional aspects here. Some general facts as we discuss about Eurasia here, I like to stress two important things from my perspective. So one is also that Eurasia at its huge contribution there, it's a huge space and includes so many different cultures, but also economic and political systems are quite different. So therefore, I personally like to make as detailed distinctions as possible, at least to say, okay, East Asia, Western, Eastern Europe, and so on. There we have a little bit more of a fitting division there. And yeah, we should just be aware of the great distances that we have in Eurasia, especially in Central Asia. These are things that we need to consider also in doing research and making suggestions and recommendations about political actions and so on. The Belt and Road is definitely connecting Europe and Asia, as you can see on the maps as well. The map at the bottom, this is from the Mercator Institute, MERIX, sitting in Berlin. They have prepared a map at the early days of the Belt and Road Initiative, but still up to date. So yeah, the Belt and Road definitely connects Europe and Asia. It is also kind of a normative way, but we can see that in absolute figures, in terms of trade and connectivity, there is progress. But there's still a lot to do to say, okay, we have a kind of regional integration. Yeah, other things. What we have seen so far is also that there's actually not something like a regional institution that covers Eurasia in a kind of overarching union. So the Belt and Road can be something like this. Of course, we have the Eurasian economic community in the northern part, but there's still space for kind of region building, not just institutions, but also a bottom-up region building, regionalization. I will talk about this later as well. I don't like to repeat some general things, but for me it's important to underline that the Belt and Road is somehow, yeah, the reviving of an old idea, but context conditions are probably different than we have hundreds of years ago. Politics are quite complex today. We have, yeah, especially now, times of uncertainty. So the Belt and Road is also about power and globalization. We should not forget that. And so Central Asia, Eurasia at all, this kind of emerging region when it comes to future economic development as well, especially in Central Asia. Yeah, in this regard, I perceive the Belt and Road as a kind of a globalization strategy from China. And one of the core questions for me is who is going to profit? We have seen an interesting discourse throughout the last years and a couple of many different reactions. We had a kind of rejection in the European Union as well. There were disputes. There were also trade conflicts with the US. We have discussed alternatives lately also with the G7, but there is also kind of cautious cooperation. Yeah, to provide these local economic development seems not that easy as it sounds, and probably we need also kind of interlinking and on a regional level. So we can see that in regional integration can mediate between the local development and this enormous economic globalization impact that we have on the other side. So yeah, regional integration might be a fitting element with also kind of governance, whatever kind of governance this is, can be more soft governance that also suits the Asian economies that have a different kind of economic and political system as well. We should be aware also of these different political systems that we can see. Yeah, why is it so hard to generate local benefits within the BRI? We have a couple of research indications that criticize the local implementation. This refers to regional spillover effects, international collaboration, the provision of transport services, identifying in the first instance the real benefits and risks for local economies. It's still a challenge. We do not know exactly about the strategic motivations that China is pursuing. Still the integration, at least between also the Asian countries itself, not just on a bilateral way between China and I don't know, Kazakhstan, for example. We should think about multilateral cooperation here. And this is one of the core points to have really a regional integration. Also with specific regard to Eurasia, there's mainly the problem of linkages between the countries, as I said before. And yeah, to profit locally and to use impulses from this globalization effort. It is still kind of global-local nexus that is still present between those different spatial scales. During COVID-19, I think, especially in the early beginning of the pandemic, we are currently questioning globalization. Should we go on with globalization? Should there be a kind of deglobalization? What is COVID-19 making with our progress that we have at the moment? And in this regard, there are a lot of news articles and research and so on, but we should keep some general things in mind. So one is, from my perspective, that in the end, globalization drives also our development in a cooperative way. There are a couple of benefits, of course. We can see just like access to cultures, access to markets, access to talents, and so on. The question is, but now, how to shape a more sustainable future of globalization, as we have also challenges, not just with COVID-19, but also before. We have kind of loss of cultural identity, maybe employer immigration, job-related issues, expansion difficulties, and all those things. So we need to be aware of a kind of a new globalization, and colleagues of mine often use the concept of re-globalization towards a new globalization, a more sustainable one that is also a little bit changing the scales, including digitalization, democratic issues as well. How to approach the BRI from a conceptual perspective? This might be a question that challenges a couple of researchers. We all have a kind of mother discipline where we have studied for a long time. And I've tried to dive into completely different concepts, of course, independent to the particular problem statement. But no matter whether it's politics, infrastructure, trade, geoeconomics, it should not be the primary focus. It is important that you go on with the specific problem statement. Politics, infrastructure development was also a key issue in the first days, but also trade, and mobilities. And tourism, by the way, my original background is also in tourism management. This is also a topic that relates to the whole issue of cultural exchange along the Belt and Road Initiative. And there are definitely a lot more concepts there. In my PhD, I basically argue and support that the BRI can only be researched and analyzed in a good way if we combine concepts in an interdisciplinary way. We need specific case studies, that this is true, but in the end, we should also be open-minded and able to combine different concepts, maybe political one, economic one, and so on. We need to combine different spatial scales. We need also to implement proper methods, probably also innovative methods. And yeah, this is just a short selection of papers where I was involved with relation to the Belt and Road Initiative. If you are interested, I'm also happy to cooperate. And on the right-hand side, we've tried to collect some concepts that relate to the Belt and Road Initiative placed in human geography, but also cultural studies, political economies, business economies, and so on. There are a lot of concepts there, but our point was that we need more interdisciplinary research. And this is the last slide with information. I'd like to recommend you also the edited volume that we already published with Springer on the right-hand side, and a call for papers on the left-hand side, where you can still include one or two interesting papers if you like to propose one. And now coming to the two concepts that I have chosen for this study that I'm presenting you today. And it's about regionalization, but in the next step also about multi-level governance. I'm talking about regions in this regard, and we can see that regions in a global view are gaining more and more importance. We have a world of regions. This is also a popular book heading, A World of Regions by Katzenstein. But yeah, I think it's true for now, and we can also see in 2018 we had about 150 economic integration agreements, 29 custom unions, and we can still see this high interdependence on a regional level as well. And it's also every time a hard question to define a region. Actually, we have approaches according to their geography, culture, history, administration. There are a lot of different ways to define a region, but regions, in my perception, and also with the Belt and Road Initiative, represent also a kind of cluster. Can be an economic cluster through trade agreements, but we have also trade unions on a very deep step of regional integration. We can also have such unions, like the EU is one, but there are, of course, a lot of different models. And just to give you a short impression, regionalization represents the bottom-up and endogenous integration, more driven by market forces. And we have this other concept of regionalism. It's often comprehensive and holistic, but in the end, it's more a state-driven process of region building. Regionalism includes also setting rules, agreements, starting institutions. And the last slide with these conceptual definitions, and this is related to multi-level governance. In my previous studies have shown on the Belt and Road Initiative that there's not much communication between the different levels, between local, regional, global, Chinese, national levels. So there are also a lot of local stakeholders that are not quite informed about the Belt and Road Initiative, even about mega projects. So even so, we've talked to a lot of local politicians, and they are often very reserved in this issue. Of course, there are also some local conflicts emerging. So this is a really complicated issue also at the local level. And multi-level governance can be one conceptual approach to support the exchange between the spatial scales can be also a proper path for sustainable development. It belongs also to participatory approaches, and yeah, could be also important in regard to the whole communication strategy in the Belt and Road Initiative. The specific results that I present to you now are based on a method of scenario building. This is also presented in one paper, but it's still under review. And scenario building for me is an interesting method because it's very flexible and it follows various steps. And our question here was, what are the future development scenarios for regional development in the new Silk Road? And yeah, in this regard, I have derived a draft on 4 scenarios. Those are also based on theoretical insights, practical problems, and we have discussed those scenarios with international experts from various fields: economics, politicians, some in Europe, some in China, some in between. So there are many different impressions here. But yeah, keep in mind, this is kind of qualitative studies. You can also build scenarios with more of a quantitative approach as well. Yeah, this figure is one of the main results. What we can see here, there are two major axes: regional effects and regional cooperation, from low to high. The 4 scenarios reflect a kind of stepwise process. Starting with a negative scenario is the first one, called withdrawal or reduction. Then we have solo efforts, corridor development, and finally a kind of holistic regional integration. And in blue we can see quotations from the interview. So let me just briefly explain what is meant with those scenarios. There are, of course, short descriptions that try to summarize everything, but now I will give you the basic information. And the first scenario, withdrawal or reduction, treats the topic whether China can also withdraw from the initiative or at least reduce its investments in some countries. We can see also some examples in practice where this has happened. And there are also financial problems with some projects, but overall we need to acknowledge that interviews also evaluate that this scenario is rather unlikely. In opposition scenario number 2, with this solo efforts, I called it, yeah, this is a rather likely scenario, and maybe this is also the scenario where we are at the moment between 2 and 3. It's not that easy to say, but we have regional differences, of course. But this means that China kind of represents dominance in companies, and Chinese companies and state-led companies are investing. They drive the investments. Asia Development Bank is supporting a lot of those investments. And so at a local scale, we can also see Chinese workers that build a new infrastructure. We have companies from China that operate on the transport infrastructure. This is kind of an example of what is discussed here in this scenario. And this scenario definitely also limits local benefits and at least something like an involvement. Going further, the third scenario on corridor development. This would be an important one, and it indicates also connectivity between the different countries. And at its best, around infrastructure hubs, cluster develop that suit also the 4th scenario. And of course, the 4th scenario is the one that is highly desired. But actually, our experts said, okay, we cannot see it at the moment. And there are a lot of issues there. The local effects are too little for having really a scenario like number 4. And mainly also the connectivity between the countries is missing. For example, between the Central Asian countries, the weeks are too weak in economic context. And yeah, at the moment, there's not much economic development emerging for the participating countries or around the infrastructure. Of course, there are positive examples, I know, but in a holistic agreement or discussion, we still have a lot of those issues here. Yeah, what else can I say about this graph? Yeah, it represents somehow that interlinking and cooperation is strongly needed to achieve a kind of bottom-up regionalization. And that's a regionalization with highly connected economies can also provide better or more benefits for the participating countries. In detail, the scenario building offers a very in-depth analysis of the situation. There are a lot of more results that we can see here, but I will also show some further results, for example, here on sustaining local development. And yeah, our study shows that there are, of course, positive effects in transport and trade. And we can also see that we have a strong transit trade, so meaning that transport and trade is mainly operated in East Asia and Western Europe, and in between, yeah, we still have some weaknesses for transit countries. It's still hard to integrate in those trade corridors. Dependence on Chinese efforts, transportation speed is increasing. We have also some effects for tourism. Still problems with the financing, but on the other hand side, the perception of risk in participating countries is also an issue. I will come to this back later as well. Majority ownership mergers. We are talking also about counter initiatives, as G7 has announced, or the EU with its program some years ago. Coming back to multi-level governance, we can derive a couple of criteria which can suit governance. And I know that there's all the time there's the basic question, do we need a governance in the Belt and Road Initiative? And yeah, at first, so our experts clearly stated that some kind of governance is needed. Also, it needs to be adjusted with the different styles of doing business and politics between Asia and Europe. We have huge cultural differences, and those cultural differences are also visible in doing business at the end. And here you can see some examples or some criteria: openness, flexibility, responsibility. Even in, I can say for Germany, we have often the discussion about standards, but also lately about ethical standards. Multilateral, the initiative should include or needs to include yeah, a couple of neighboring regions, and all of these regions need to participate in a very active way. Okay, well, what does it mean? 5 minutes?
Could you wrap up in the next 3-5 minutes?
Yeah, this works totally well, as I'm nearly at the end. There are also some results in relation to Eurasia at its complete expansion, but there we can see also the need to support and strengthen linkages in between Eurasian countries, and some specific examples. For example, Eastern Europe, it's still torn between Europe and Asia, and this is also a kind of political discussion. Yeah, conclusion and learnings. I try to formulate some theses here, and we can see some of those highlighted. It's important to talk about acceptance among the residents. Also for an economic development, we need to strengthen local clusters. And such strengthening of local clusters is also somehow in the responsibility of the receiving countries. We definitely need here also local support. It's not just to provide investments from China. We need also local support. We need a long-term strategy. China is not giving us every country a long-term strategy. It's also in the responsibility of each country to provide long-term sustainability. On the other hand side, we are also, dependent on Chinese investments in a lot of those countries. And with this, I think this is the last slide. There's a broad consensus, I think, in the media and under scientists that COVID-19 can also be a chance to shape future globalization. And as I was talking about globalization in the beginning, I like to end with this issue. And I think the Belt and Road Initiative is definitely one of the major topics that shapes globalization during next years. And hopefully from my side, hopefully we have also important discussions directly in the region, for example, in Central Asia, in the Caucasus region, on the Belt and Road Initiative and the future development. There we need a good discussion, and this is the place where benefits should evolve, but where we can see also huge challenges. And this is all from my side. And yeah, if you have questions, I think we will wrap up the questions at the end of all the presentations. But otherwise, if you like to contact me, you are welcome to do so. Thank you very much at this moment.
Well, thank you, Hannes. And I think Ron is here. Is working? Yes, Ron should be here. So, yes. Can you share your? Do you have presentation?
So this is my turn now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I had some internet problems. Yes. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks again. Really nice to see you again. So today I'm going to present my current paper, and this is also built on my PhD thesis. And so the title of my presentation is Assembling China's Belt and Road Initiative, a Post-Structural Critique. So the idea, I think most of us are familiar with China's Belt and Road Initiative. So here I'm going to just very quickly to recap some of the major kind of debates. So Beijing's narrative about Belt and Road Initiative is this is a platform of open and inclusive cooperation and a public good that China provides to the world. This is open to everyone, does not target a third party. So basically what Beijing framed BRI as a open initiative for global cooperation. So we have so many kind of a scholarly debates about BRI, what BRI is, what is the purpose of BRI. So I kind of take the advantage of the current literature and broadly map them into these two categories. So they are not exhaustive, but however, I think it covers a lot of papers here. So the very first scholar, they are looking at BRI from a political economy perspective. So they argue BRI is a state-led spatial fix to either China's own problems or regional problems claimed by China. So this is about the Asia in particular lacks sufficient investment in infrastructure. This is also about China's own problems concerning its widening economic development gap. So the other one is looking at more from a realist kind of international relations perspective. They argue this is China's global strategy or grand strategy to expand its sphere of influence, also to challenge the US dominance and to establish a China-centered order. So for these are very helpful for us to understand the China's Belt and Road Initiative. However, I think these arguments are based on a assumption that BRI is global, is China's global strategy. This particular assumption, I think, needs to be problematized. So what I'm doing in my current paper is I problematize this particular assumption embedded in a lot of literature that BRI is China's global initiative. You know, I'm just trying to engage and focus on this becoming of a global BRI. I'm not focused on the being of a global BRI. So I'm asking, how has a global BRI become normalized as a unproblematic, necessary, or even natural strategy of a governance? So to do so, I use Foucault's idea of power, and most importantly, I rely on Deleuze's idea of assemblage. Assemblage, according to Deleuze, is a multiplicity which is made up of so many different heterogeneous terms and which establish liaisons, relations between them. So 3 features of assemblage help me to understand the process, the emergence of a global BRI. So they are multiplicity, they are heterogeneity, and the anti-essentialism. So a multiplicity means that there are so many different components, from previous speakers, we have trade, we have people-to-people kind of exchanges within BRI. So all these different components can be actually detached and reattached to other policies and to make BRI different. So, and the other one is heterogeneity. So there are so many different elements, and this particular concept helped me to move away from, governments, from politicians, into other materials like technologies, like geography, that kind of elements. The other one is anti-essentialism, means there is no essence to BRI. So there is no way that BRI is global from the very beginning. So this global nature, this open, this cooperative nature is socially constructed and should be problematized and understood properly. So in essence, I'm arguing in my current paper that this global, open, and cooperative nature of BRI claimed by Beijing was not obvious, was not natural, rather emergent and contingent. And second, I'm arguing that this particular emergence of BRI was not a Big Bang moment. It's just a very messy, very uneven, and contested in the process. So I personally divided into 3 different stages, but in my paper, I only cover 2 stages, okay? So the very first stage actually happens before 2013. So I'm arguing that even before BRI, the Chinese government has problematized 2 different phenomena, so make those 2 phenomena or events into a problem which needs to be addressed by the government. So the very first one is the China's economic priority has been reframed. So you notice before President Xi Jinping, China's economic problem has always centering around the growth. So the whole strategy focuses on how much we should grow every year. We move from that to about the quality of economic growth. So we focus on the structure of the economy. The second is, you notice some of the shifts in China's foreign policy strategy. So I kind of argue that this is China's national identity conception has been problematized from basically keeping a low profile, being very passive, to more proactive. So this is those 2 phenomena, those 2 issues have been made into two particular problems which require the attention of the central government. This is the very first stage, which I cover in my thesis, but not in my paper. So the second one is between 2013 and 2015. So at this stage, I argue that BRI has been made by the government becoming more ordered. What do I mean by ordered? So a lot of scholars, a lot of the Chinese officials, they claim BRI started with this Silk Road economic belt and the 21st century maritime Silk Road in 2013 when President Xi visited Kazakhstan and Indonesia. And so, however, if you look at those two speeches, which claimed that Beijing as the origin of BRI, there is nothing about BRI. Okay, so there are two separate regional initiatives. However, the connections of those two are not obvious, and the President Xi Jinping never really addressed that. And then also I noticed in 2014 on 2 or 3 different occasions, the Councillor Yang Jiechi and the President Xi Jinping, when they addressed foreign audience, they actually said, I proposed 2 initiatives. So if you look at those kind of things, you will notice, you will wonder, is this actually 1 initiative or 2? The other things, you find multiple different names have been used. So I argue that these are not just rhetoric, these are actual conceptualizations. So the Chinese government been using initiative, the local government often use strategy, and you notice some of the officials also use plan. So you have so many different kind of names going on there that indicates actually there is no consensus about this particular initiative, if I may say. And the other one is anything before 2016, usually the so-called Belt and Road Initiative, sorry, the BRI projects, they are not BRI projects. They are projects which happened way before BRI. They are rebranded as BRI. So, and then around late 2014, early 2015, the government started to realize the issue and started to intervene and to make this ordered BRI, which I named as an ordered BRI. So 3 strategies the government has been using. First, to reconceptualize the Silk Road economic belt and the maritime Silk Road through discourses. So the one of the example I can give you is the government issued a policy paper arguing, saying from now on we can only use initiative to describe this policy rather than strategy, rather than plan, rather than program. And at the same time, they specifically say this is 1 initiative rather than 2. They also use the idea of Silk Road spirit to kind of consolidate these 2 kind of separate initiatives are 1. The other one is they started to organize these 2 Silk Roads through institutional design. So before 2016, the government first established the leadership, small leadership group. So this particular group I established. There is no specific time I can identify. However, their very first public appearance is early 2015. So that means it cannot be established way before that. So they use this particular small leaders group to monitor, to implement some of the policies concerning BRI. The other institution is the government established the Silk Road Fund, as well as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. But I argue between 2013 and 2015, their role was very limited. And the third one is they are trying to build BRI assembly through political categorization, which I refers to this vision and action documents the government issued in March 2015. So in this particular document, they categorize 5 different kind of activities concerning BRI, and they issued they elaborated about the reasons behind China's Belt and Road Initiative. So through these 3 kind of tactics, I argue that BRI gradually kind of emerged actually from being a very disorderly and messy into an ordered through institutional design, through discursive construction. So the other one is between 2015 and 2017. I argue through this during this period, BRI gradually become global, open, and cooperative. So I argue that the one of the things I want to draw your attention is the material. So this particular global nature has not just been constructed through discourses, but also through materials. So the first is about the BRI's practices and projects from kind of domestic to regional, like China has some of the cooperations with neighboring countries to basically expand this BRI, their cooperation from the regional kind of neighbors to other countries like Latin America. The other one is all the railways China has been built with other countries or in other countries, and all the ports China has been leasing from or co-building with other countries. Those things gave a particular body to this global BRI. So they are actually constitutes the nature of BRI. Without those technologies, without those ports, you wouldn't really see that global BRI is there. And also speaking back to this China's identity and history, and I argue that this global nature is also constituted through the China's perception of itself as a responsible great power and its particular understanding of history, as President Xi Jinping often argues, saying we need to reclaim our rightful place in the history. So what I'm trying to argue in this particular period is BRI gradually becomes a global assemblage characterized by openness and cooperation. So in conclusion, I just want to highlight 3 things that BRI should be understood as something much messier, multi-causal and contingent, even though the Communist Party has been attempted to fix its meaning in discourses and practices. The other one is I argue BRI was made to be global, open and cooperative, constituted by a lot of elements. Particularly, I want to emphasize these non-human elements. Those technologies, geographies, they play a very important part to constitute the global nature of BRI. And I also argue that the assemblage allows me, in particular in this case, to transcend this traditional binary of domestic and foreign policy, that could otherwise artificially constrain the sub-objects of inquiry, and in ways that in which the analysis of foreign policy is conducted. It gives me more leeway to understand the particular narrative of BRI and also to engage with BRI. So rather than just simply dismiss China's particular narrative of BRI, we can engage with this particular narrative in a much better way, so we can understand it and address it if necessary. Thank you very much. That's my presentation.
Great, thank you so much. I think now is the time for Q&A. So feel free just to unmute yourself and ask your questions, or you can as well type in the chat.
I can start. I have a question for Hannes. So yesterday you missed my presentation, but you can still read the paper. But no, so my question is if you have found any paper on the financing of the Belt and Road Initiative and how that affects the scenarios that you were presenting, or if in your I mean, when you did all these interviews for building these scenarios, if any of the participants discussed anything about the financing of the BRI.
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions. And yeah, indeed, not just with this scenario studies, but also with previous studies. I think financing was an issue in nearly all of the interviews that I've done throughout the last years. And I don't know if it's always related to local instances, to local problems, but financing is also a topic that is quite popular throughout the media, because there are some interesting and very popular cases where financing was a real problem in the Belt and Road Initiative, and especially the international experts are quite aware of the financing issue. Rising debts for the countries, for the receiving countries, it's always an issue. From my point of view, also reflecting interviews and different studies, there are, I think, last year I've done a kind of literature review, a very extensive one on the Belt and Road Initiative, and I remember that there were some papers directly related to financing. I can also have a look at those issues later. From my perception, it's always related to the receiving country as well. So there are a lot of receiving countries that are, from an economic perspective, are too weak to receive such huge fundings. Often this is quite more than the local GDP. So we have a problem with the relations here, I think. Quite huge investments, small receiving economies. There's some kind of a gap there, and with financing comes also the issue of dependence from Chinese investors, and so financing has, I think, a lot of interlinking with political and economic decisions that follow in the end.
Yeah. So I would appreciate that I can send you an email and we can share.
This is a good idea.
Please.
Thank you.
Yes.
Please get in touch with me. Yeah.
I think Indrajit has his hand raised.
Thanks to both the presentations. They were really very informative as well as enjoyable, if I may say. So great. A question for Hans. Is that correct to pronounce your name?
Yeah, nearly. It is Hannes.
Hannes, okay. I just wanted to know a little more about the method. So, could you tell us about the scenario planning sort of exercise that you did? What exactly did it entail? And you talked about experts. I think you had conversations with experts. So who were these experts, and what did it entail really? And to Ran, of course, your work is very inspiring, and I've learned a lot. I just wondered if there was something you could say about, the ways in which, and I think you touched on this, a bit, but the ways in which domestic, sort of political conflicts or competition between different factions within the Communist Party, or between state and provincial, union and provincial level officials, or provincial and local level officials played a role. I think you did mention that a bit, but if you could tell us a bit more, that'll be really helpful, because I think one of the things your presentation does is to break the myth of a monolithic China, of a homogeneous Chinese state, if you will. So I don't know, yeah, it'd be great to hear from you both.
Okay, maybe I can share this slide again. Yeah.
Yes, please.
You should see the steps. Of course, there are many different models how to do such scenario studies, and there are also different kind of scenarios. There are also forecasts that have a more of a quantitative aspects. But I concentrated on scenario building. This is a rather qualitative approach as well. And you can see the steps on the right side. Of course, there's a lot of preparation in it. So scenario building will not start directly with doing interviews, but there's a lot of things you need to do in the first way. And for me, it was to kind of sketch those different scenarios. There was really a draft with some general aspects in the beginning, and the more you go into detail with the literature and also with the first interviews, some concrete scenarios develop. There are so many different steps, maybe just to name a few. It is also to identify uncertainties. And two major uncertainties we can also see here. It's the question, what kind of regional effects emerge? It's a kind of uncertainty, and we do not know exactly also about the degree of cooperation. Can also be non-cooperation, there can also be conflict on the other hand side. So these are two major uncertainties. Finding options, what could happen then? So also to include this withdrawal and reduction scenario. This is also something that comes from the method of scenario planning. I was not thinking in the first instant that the Belt and Road Initiative that China may withdraw from the BAI, but it's important to have such an opposite position just to discuss it and to discuss causal relations also. And then you need to write scenario stories, and this was the basis of interviews. It were only 15 qualitative interviews, but up to 90 minutes interviews, very extensive, with international experts, very diverse setting. And with all those results and the analysis of those interviews, such scenarios, stories have developed, and there were some consistencies checked, and there are also some open questions to outline options for future policy implications and so on. This is basically the process that I've decided for.
Okay. Could I just follow up on that? The different scenarios, they emerge from your thinking and your literature, is it? And then you invite comment on those scenarios. Is my understanding correct?
Yeah, so we need somehow a starting point for discussing all these things, and but I've collected a lot of literature on those different approaches, and from theory there are also some hints. For example, to have a scenario like a steady state or a visionary, the fourth one on holistic integration. This is kind of the visionary scenario, while the first one is this worst case scenario. There are also hints how to structure such scenarios from worst case to visionary and so on. And this is somehow providing me a frame.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes. So, well, thank you, Ingrid. So, yes, that's one of the things I want to kind of highlight, especially to IR scholars from my perspective. You know, if you are China experts, you of course you understand a little bit more about this messiness within actually the fractional kind of faction fight within the Communist Party. Yes, there are very interesting things, you know, during that period. As I said, I named it as amorphous kind of assemblage, a BRI assembly. So basically, BRI is everything, you know, just based on your own interpretation. One of the things I want to highlight is you will see local governments are fighting for the meaning of this project, this initiative. So there is one particular interesting is the starting point of the Silk Road economic belt. So which city is the starting point? So usually you will have only two cities, you know, either Xi'an or the other one, I forgot actually, it's within the same province. However, you have other cities to actually stand up and stood up and say, we are the starting point. One of the city is Chongqing, actually is where I come from. The Chongqing party secretary even tabled a motion and to present the argument saying we are the starting point, you know, and the evidence they use is the Xinjiang, the Chongqing Xinjiang Europe Railway. So that's the very first kind of a railway. It was now the Chinese government claim it as a Belt and Road project, BRI project. However, this railway started way before the initiative. The very first I remember is around 2012. So you will see a lot of these kind of conflicts or infightings within the Chinese government, and you will also see lots of business, you know, they took advantage of this initiative and they claim they are the kind of a correct, they have correct interpretation of BRI. So yes, I do recognize and do elaborate in my thesis about this particular period, like so many different fractions, local governments are fighting for the interpretation. The other one I want to emphasize is even the outcome, this you know, the outcome of this the publication of vision and action, this particular documents, it's not what the government, the central government imposed on the local government. It's kind of a result of the interactions between those two, because before this document, Jiangsu province was kind of very favorable candidates. You know, even President Xi Jinping visit that province and say, you know, Jiangsu province could be fully integrated into the whole project. However, when that particular policy comes out, there is no way, you can't find anything about Jiangsu. So you will see there is a very serious kind of infighting before, well, after President Xi proposed these two initiatives and before the central government issued the very first policy paper on BRI.
Great, thank you, Ran.
I think Nick has a hand raised.
Oh yeah, thanks guys for very interesting presentation. Certainly learned a lot. I guess my question is for Ran, and it's along similar lines in a way, which is, I mean, you know, just to comment first, I think it is really important to, from different perspectives, to stress this idea of China as not being some sort of monolithic force, and the BRI is not this kind of, you know, sort of. I still think there is a kind of view sometimes of, you know, kind of a group of people sitting in a room in Beijing and literally planning everything from some sort of central node. And I do think it's really important to get away from that. I guess what I wanted to ask is, from a slightly different angle, you do have a few different narratives about how that sort of, if you like, assemblage works. That one of them is to say, okay, so actually Belt and Road is not that out of place from sort of other kind of Chinese political traditions, where you would get a kind of You know, I've heard it described as a slogan or even like a campaign, where you would have a kind of top-level directive that's quite loose, and then actors around that and underneath that have to respond in various ways, but can interpret it in various ways, as long as they are sort of broadly seen to be sort of acting upon it. So I wonder how you felt that that fits in with your kind of schema of how all these things fit together. And, you know, are you coming from quite a different place from this? I mean, theoretically, of course, but is that something that chimes with what you're saying, or are you proposing something contrasting here, I guess is my question.
Oh, thank you, Nick. That's really good question. I think that's actually what my external asked me about this. So I would emphasize, I wouldn't really want to make BRI as an exception. You know, so it's basically what you mentioned before. Even the China's famous opening up program is basically a kind of very vague, very broad, as you mentioned, like slogan politics. I think one of the British scholars wrote about. So I wouldn't say it's completely kind of a different, very like you will notice through my presentation, it's about a very vague, broad idea. And this particular one initiative, this particular narrative is kind of afterthought, you know, once they propose and after some of the competition or contribution from scholars, local politicians, the government stand up and say, you know, this is what BRI is about. But I think I do differentiate my approach to that. It's not just because of the idea of being using assemblage, and the other thing is because I think if you use assemblage, you will be more open-minded that BRI can be different in the future, because the assemblage means it's a multiplicity. As I said, the different components of this assemblage can be detached again and can be detached to other things. So that means other components can be, you know, moved and to attach to BRI. So that makes this me or scholars in this area to be more open-minded, to say, okay, BRI can be different in the very future. This also relates to the concept of anti-essentialism, because there is no essence about BRI. BRI is not like this idea of cooperation or investment, as most of the scholars focus on, you know, BRI as an investment strategy, you know, infrastructure. But it can be very different in the future. The other one is, I think my approach slightly different from the other ones is because we consider materials. So we gave the agency two materials, as I mentioned, technology, and I name it as China's infrastructure capabilities. So without these particular technologies, China couldn't really go out and to build those railways, those ports, because those railways, those ports across the world, they gave the meaning, they gave the particular body to this nature and make it more manifested and obvious to other people. So I think that's what assemblage approach distinguished from the traditional one. But I agree with you. I wouldn't want to make it as exceptional. You know, it's in line, largely in line with traditional kind of Chinese political practices. However, I just want to emphasize this assemblage approach does open probably a few avenues to explore a little bit further, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. I think we have a question from Cora in the chat. I will read it out. That was a great presentation, Ranhu. Really enjoyed it. I look forward to reading it. I have a question about whether you place China's contemporary strategy within a comparative historical perspective, national growth being rooted within global strategies. Your paper reminded me a bit of Tim Mitchell's work on the US construction of a global financial and energy system in the post-war context. You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much. That's a really lovely, comments and question. I don't know exactly what you asked me about, but I do like to at my first kind of stage, a pre-BRI stage, I do argue that the government, the Chinese government, has reframed its economic problems. So it's not about economic growth. It's not simply about how much percentage GDP we can grow every year, but it's about the quality. It's about the structure of the economy. We're trying to make sure the economic growth could be more sustainable, if that makes sense. Yes, so I would say I do spend quite a lot of time to kind of trace back how the Chinese government frame its economic problems, from problems concerning growth to problems concerning the structure itself.
Do we have more questions? I actually have one to handle myself. So thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. My research is also about the BRI, so I looked a lot into the literature as well, and I happen to have the same perspective, looking at the global view on the BRI as the global strategy versus the view on the BRI as a domestically driven initiative to solve the growth problem. And I came across the book by Ye Zicheng on the global China, or the grand strategy of China, right? It's from 2003, where he writes about different perspectives within the foreign policy group in Beijing, right? How they view what the future of China is, and how the national rejuvenation is connected to China becoming the next kind of global power. And so how do you think about this kind of narrative, and how it's being fitting into the BRI being this grand strategy, and also BRI being the response to the US pivoting to the East, from 2010s, the Obama administration. So oftentimes, the people, the IR scholars write about this within this context. So what would be your response to that? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's thank you for your question. That's really really good one. I agree with you. And I elaborate before the Belt and Road Initiative. I emphasize two issues had been problematized by China, has been made into a problem. The very first one is economic problem. China's economic problem is about its structure, and the other one is identity problem. So I discussed about the general shifting from the keeping a low profile strategy to striving for achievements. So I frame it as the problem of traditional passivity. And then I also talk a little bit about the China dream as well. So identity conception plays a very important role from my perspective. But during that stage, I argue this particular phenomenon or issue has been framed as the top problem which needs to be addressed, and BRI comes into a play. So BRI emerged as a response to this particular problem. And then I didn't talk about the identity issue in the period between 2013 and 2015. However, I do address in 2015, after 2015. So I argue this particular conception of China see itself as a global responsible power. And also I've been talking to some of the scholars, Chinese scholars, they don't really see a revival of the traditional, what's the word? the traditional kind of China in the middle kind of idea. Actually, what they are thinking at the moment is the China as a node of a network, if that makes sense. So this kind of idea of how China sees itself plays an important role, gave this particular meaning to BRI. So I argue that this BRI has been framed as a public good, which corresponds to China's perception as a responsible power. And this because, and also I argue that only great powers can provide public good. So I would agree with you to a very large degree that identity conception plays a very critical role. But in this case, I would argue saying give the particular meaning to BRI.
Okay, thank you. There's one more comment from Laura. I think you would find Tim Mitchell's work really helpful because he also takes a very infrastructural approach to U.S. growth within global systems. Yeah,
thank you very much. I'll definitely. Oh yes, I think he also writes a book about Egypt. I think it's talking about different materials, how those materials play into the policy. I think I read his book about that. Thank you very much.
Are there any more comments or questions, or do you think we should wrap up now? Nick, what do you think?
Sorry, I have a question, but I don't know if you can hear me. Yes. I think I have a problem with my video. Okay, can you see me? No? Okay, it's fine. I will just ask my question. If you can hear me, then I think it's fine. So I have two questions actually. One is for Hans, and the other one is for, oh, I think maybe this working. So the first one is for Hans, and the other one is for Ran. Thanks for your question, for your presentations. I thought it was very interesting. Hans, I was wondering if you could go back to, like, you spoke about those different scenarios that would kind of like shape China's like BRI projects and connections with countries. But I was wondering if you could expand a bit more on like the conditions that would kind of define these different scenarios. Like what are the like structures or like context in the receiving countries that would like determine if it's like one scenario or the other. I thought it would be interesting to expand a bit more on that. For Ran, thanks a lot for your presentation. I think it's really interesting. I'm myself doing a PhD about the digital Silk Road in North Africa. I'm a first-year student, so I'm looking at Chinese digital investments in North Africa, and I thought your presentation was very relevant to my own work. And I was just wondering, yeah, like I've read a lot of reports kind of saying that, I mean, we don't really know what is a BRI project at this point. It's like a poorly defined. We know that it's like Chinese investments across the world, but that there are a lot of investment projects that were actually decided before the BRI that are today packaged as BRI infrastructural projects. And so some have called it, just like a new marketing strategy, because it's not fundamentally different from the going out strategy adopted in the early 2000s. I was wondering what you thought about that. Like, is it really it's clearly not a structured project, but to what extent is it just like marketing and doing a bit same of what China was doing before, after 2001? But just under a different name. But also within that, I thought that your presentation kind of had a very bottom-up look at the BRI. And I think that it's important to also highlight the work and like pressure of Chinese firms in the project. I wondered to what extent you talk about Chinese multinationals and how there was like pressures also from them to push China towards, you know, adopting a project like the BRI because of excess capacity within the domestic Chinese market. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the role of firms in determining the BRI. Thank you.
Okay, then I should start probably. I try to show the scenarios again if it works now. Yeah, thank you very much. Two very good questions that you state here, and important ones as well. It was not initially my idea to define some preconditions, as you've said, but there are certainly a couple of hints that we should be aware of, and that define also the kind of degree of integration here at this point. One is, I think, I mentioned earlier, local support. So it is not enough just to receive investments and to receive new infrastructures, but you need to provide local support. You need to think about future development plans for the country, and even for smaller regions, for the local areas, how to deal with the new infrastructure. What can you actually do with the new infrastructure that also serves your companies and even your residents? So this is one thing, and also to provide economic conditions for doing business, supporting international businesses as well. So it's probably not enough to have a good infrastructure connection, but you need to provide also preconditions that your companies can follow such a corridor development or regional integration. Of course, it depends also on the type of investment, infrastructure investment, but there are also mergers and acquisitions. Those things also define spillover effects for local companies. From my point also, infrastructure construction sites, they need also to be supported by local workers where possible, also to provide some kind of a knowledge transfer. What is also important, I think, is that you need to have a kind of domestic market, meaning, it just means that you have a strong domestic market that provides also demand for products that are traded along the BRI. So if you have a strong domestic market, I think there are some things that are going easier. Connection to existing markets, you need to have companies that support in a very active way trade on the corridor. And at the end, I think it's also a matter of governance to have at least a kind of structure or transparency with Chinese investments. We know there are a lot of there's a huge criticism on transparency, where projects happen, where not, what is kind of which kind of investments are placed in which destination or which region. So we need a kind of governance. Also, we need a very good communication between the different levels. As I said earlier, it was often the case that local politics or local companies do not know that, just 2 kilometers away, there's a big infrastructure investment, who's the investor, who's providing workforce, and so on. So we need a kind of transparency and governance combination with communication and so on. It needs to be in a very cooperative way, as Ran Hu also stated. The BRI should be cooperative and open. For me, cooperative is only if you also include the very local level and everyone is informed and everyone somehow can take part in this initiative. I hope that this somehow answered your question.
Well, so as for your first question, I would say that the problem I'm trying to in this paper, in my thesis, I'm just trying to show that I'm aware of like a lot of scholars, they see the connections or the continuity of the China's practices, as you've mentioned, the going global strategy and some of the other things, like, you know, even China-Pakistan economic corridor. You know, now we call it, this is a BRI project, but this was an idea actually proposed by Premier Li Keqiang before the Xi's idea. So yes, I agree with you, but I think probably in my paper, in my thesis, I'm just trying to say these kind of things should not be taken for granted, and you should see the emerging process of this current understanding, which built by Beijing as a global initiative for cooperation. So I do spot on some of the connections or continuities, but I personally that's not addressed by my papers. As I said, it's not about that, but I agree with you. I would say, yes, basically a lot of projects under BRI are kind of rebranded, and you will notice a lot of projects under BRI are the local government just using BRI as money kind of a source. They just want to tap into the central government's money bags. So they say everything is about BRI. The second one, I think in my thesis, in my article, I will think about it. I think it's a really good one, but I think it's related to what Indra asked me earlier. So this bit I only address. So under in my article, I call it this as amorphous or disorderly BRI. Everything can be that. So I focus on the local government. What the local governments did is because it's simpler for me to collect data. But I think it's a good idea. I will think about it to probably use some of the examples from Chinese firms, SOEs, to show that they might play an important role in shaping BRI. Thank you.
Great. Do we have more questions? I think otherwise we can wrap up a bit earlier. Nick, what do you think? No? So if there are no more questions, then I think we could finish here. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending during these 2 days. Thank you for your contributions. And let's keep discussing the BRI. It's a fascinating topic, and looks like we can look at it from a variety of perspectives, as Hannes was pointing to.